In the frigid waters off Alaska's coast, mankind's greed is about to collide with nature's last guardian. A massive blue whale, one of the last of her kind, surfaces peacefully, unaware that high-tech hunting vessels are closing in. But these illegal whalers don't know they're being watched. Jake Mason isn't your typical fisherman. For 15 years, he was one of the deadliest Navy SEALs in history, leading missions that required perfect timing, lethal precision, and zero mistakes. His call sign was Poseidon, a protector of the seas who could strike from anywhere and disappear beneath the waves. This isn't just another conservation story. This is about how the world's most sophisticated whaling operation discovered that some predators should fear their prey's protector. When they targeted this ancient whale, they didn't realize they were sailing into carefully laid traps by a master of maritime warfare. What follows is the story of how one ex-SEAL and his elite team would dismantle a billion-dollar illegal whaling operation in just 72 hours, using nothing but a fishing boat, decades of combat experience, and the tactical genius that made him a legend in the deadliest waters on Earth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog clung to the Alaskan waters like a thick blanket, shrouding Jake Mason's fishing boat in a ghostly embrace. At 45, his weathered face carried the marks of both military service and years at sea, but his movements remained fluid and precise as he checked his nets. The Northern Star, his 30-foot fishing vessel, cut through the waters with practiced ease, its well-maintained equipment betraying its owner's military attention to detail. Dawn was Jake's favorite time. These quiet moments before the sun broke through reminded him why he'd chosen this life after leaving the SEALs. No gunfire, no explosions, no life-or-death decisions. Just the gentle rhythm of the waves and the occasional splash of marine life. His boat's radar system, far more sophisticated than any normal fishing vessel would need, showed only the usual morning traffic. A few local boats heading out for their daily catch. "Morning, beautiful," Jake murmured as a humpback whale surfaced nearby, its breath misting in the cold air. He'd named her Grace, and she'd been a regular visitor to these waters for the past 3 seasons. Like many of the local whales, she seemed to recognize his boat, often swimming alongside for hours. These peaceful encounters were a far cry from his past life, where every surface contact was a potential threat. The radio crackled to life. "Hey, Jake, you seeing these new boys out here?" It was Tom Henderson, an old-timer who'd been fishing these waters for 4 decades. Something ain't right about them. Jake's eyes narrowed as he studied his radar display. 3 new vessels had appeared on the edges of his scanning range, their movement patterns unlike typical fishing boats. They maintained precise distances from each other, suggesting military or professional training. His instincts honed through. Years of combat operations tingled with warning. "I see them, Tom," he replied carefully. "Best keep your distance for now." Switching to one of his special monitors, equipment no civilian boat should possess, Jake analyzed their electromagnetic signatures. The vessels were running sophisticated technology, including long-range sonar systems that were definitely not for fishing. His jaw tightened as he recognized the configuration, whale hunting equipment illegal in these waters. A splash caught his attention. Grace had surfaced again, closer now, her massive form dwarfing his boat. She seemed agitated, unusual for her normally calm demeanor. Jake watched as she dove deep, her behavior suggesting she sensed something wrong. The 3 suspicious vessels adjusted course slightly, their formation tightening. "Just passing through, I hope," Jake muttered. But he knew better. 15 years as a SEAL had taught him to read situations, to spot the precursors to violence. These waters were changing, and not for the better. Moving to his cabin, Jake opened a hidden compartment. Beneath his bunk, Inside lay reminders of his past life, encrypted communication equipment, tactical gear, and a satellite phone unlike anything available to civilians. He hadn't touched them since setting up his new life, but he'd never gotten rid of them either. Some habits and some connections you didn't just walk away from. Above deck, Grace breached suddenly, her massive form throwing spray high into the air before crashing back into the sea. The display was magnificent, but to Jake's trained eye it looked like a warning. The whale was telling him something was wrong, and his instincts agreed. As the sun finally broke through the fog, Jake made a decision. He activated one of his special monitors, its military-grade software beginning to record and analyze the mysterious vessel's movements. If they were what he suspected, illegal whalers, they'd soon learn these weren't the unprotected waters they'd hoped to find. "Looks like retirement might have to wait a bit longer," he said softly, watching Grace's massive form glide beneath. His boat, the peaceful life he'd built here, was about to change, but then again, peace was always temporary. Sometimes protecting it required men like him to step back into the shadows they'd left behind. The morning fog finally lifted completely, revealing the vast Alaskan waters in all their glory. Somewhere out there, 3 vessels were planning something that would shatter this peace, but they didn't know these waters like Jake did. More importantly, they didn't know who was watching them. By midday, the suspicious vessels had established a clear pattern. Jake tracked their movements while maintaining his normal fishing routine, his trained mind mapping their search grid. They were hunting something big, methodically covering the waters where Grace and other whales frequently surfaced. "Northern Star to Harbour Master," Jake called over the radio, keeping his voice casual. "Getting some unusual traffic out here. Any scheduled research vessels I should know about?" "Negative, Northern Star," came the reply. "Only registered vessels should be local fishing boats and 2 tourist charters." Sarah Chen from the Marine Conservation Center buzzed his private channel. She'd been monitoring these waters for 5 years, and Jake had come to trust her insights. "Jake, we're picking up some strange sonar activity. It's disrupting whale communication patterns." "What kind of disruption?" Jake asked, though he already knew. He'd seen these tactics before in his military days, sound patterns designed to disorient marine life, making them easier to track and hunt. "The whales are scattered, confused. Even the resident pods are breaking formation." Sarah's voice carried professional concern. "Whatever it is, it's not natural." Jake watched as Grace surfaced again, closer to his boat than usual. The massive blue whale seemed to be seeking shelter, her normal migration pattern disrupted. He'd never seen her this close to smaller vessels before. The radio crackled with worried chatter from other fishing boats. Something was spooking the fish, they reported. Nets were coming up empty. The whole ecosystem seemed to be responding to an invisible threat. Tom's voice cut through the confusion. "Jake, 2 more boats just entered from the northwest. Bigger ones. They're not responding to identification requests." Switching to his military-grade equipment, Jake confirmed Tom's report. The new vessels were commercial-sized ships, their holds large enough for industrial whaling operations. Their proximity to the 3 advanced boats couldn't be coincidence. "Sarah, you might want to alert your federal contacts," Jake suggested quietly. "I've got a feeling we're about to have a situation here." "Already done," she replied. "But you know how slow they can be. By the time they mobilize—" She didn't need to finish. Jake knew the bureaucratic pace would be too slow to stop what was coming. He watched as Grace dove deep, her massive form disappearing beneath the dark waters. The hunting vessels adjusted course immediately, their sophisticated equipment tracking her movements. Opening his secure compartment again, Jake pulled out a specialized underwater acoustic sensor, military hardware that could pick up whale songs from miles away. Grace's distinct call pattern came through clearly, but it was different now. Distressed, warning others. The hunting ships were closing in, their pattern unmistakable to Jake's experienced eye. They were creating a net of sound, herding the whales toward a killing zone where they'd be trapped between vessels. His satellite phone vibrated, a text from an old contact in maritime intelligence. Confirmed sighting of known whaling vessel Ghost Hunter entering Alaskan waters. Believed to be part of Yuan Chang Syndicate. Extremely dangerous. Federal response authorized but delayed. Jake's jaw tightened. The Yuan Chang Syndicate was notorious in the black market whale trade, known for their advanced technology and ruthless efficiency. They weren't just poachers, they were a sophisticated criminal organization with military-grade equipment and trained personnel. Grace surfaced one more time, closer than ever to Jake's boat. Her massive eye seemed to fix on him, and in that moment he felt the weight of her trust. These waters were his home now, and she was part of the life he'd sworn to protect when he left his old one behind. "Sarah," he called over the secure channel, "get me everything you have on whale movements in the area. I need to make some calls." The hunting ships were moving with increased purpose now, their formation tightening. They thought they were the predators here, that they were closing in on helpless prey, but they'd made a crucial mistake. They'd brought their hunt to the wrong waters, to waters protected by someone who knew their tactics, who'd spent years perfecting the art of maritime warfare, someone who'd once earned the callsign Poseidon for his ability to strike unseen from the depths. Jake began powering up systems he hadn't used in years, their military-grade displays coming to life one by one. It was time to remind these hunters why some waters were best left undisturbed. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Jake's deck as he met with Sarah Chen aboard the Northern Star. Her tablet displayed satellite imagery of the surrounding waters, red dots marking the hunting vessels' positions. "They're using new technology," Sarah explained, her voice tight with concern. "Some kind of focused acoustic pulse that disrupts whale navigation. It's like nothing we've seen before." Jake studied the data, his military training translating the patterns into clear intent. They're not just hunting, they're testing something. He pointed to the movement patterns. "See how they adjust after each pulse? They're refining their technique." "The blue whale is their target," Sarah confirmed. "They've been tracking her specifically. Our monitors picked up their focus signals following her migration path. Grace was special, one of the largest blue whales ever recorded, and possibly one of the oldest. Her distinctive markings and behavior patterns had made her a legend among marine biologists. Now those same unique characteristics had made her a prime target. Jake's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from his old SEAL team contact, Marcus Echo Rodriguez. "Intel confirms Yuan Chang involvement. They've developed new hunting tech, military-grade stuff. Buyers lined up for both whale and equipment demonstration." The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just a hunting operation, it was a sales pitch. They were planning to demonstrate their new technology on Grace, turning her death into a promotional event for potential buyers. "We've got movement," Sarah said suddenly, checking her instruments. "The large vessels are deploying smaller boats, fast ones." Through his binoculars, Jake watched sleek boats emerge from the larger ships. Their design was familiar, the same type used by special forces for coastal insertions. These weren't regular poachers, they were trained operators. "Sarah, I need you to do something for me," Jake said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded elite teams. "Get back to your center. Send out warnings to all local boats to clear the area. Cite weather concerns." "What are you going to do?" Jake moved to his hidden compartment, pulling out equipment he'd hoped never to use again. "Going to have a professional conversation with our visitors." Once Sarah left, Jake activated a specialized radio frequency, one he knew the hunting. The vessels would be monitoring. His message was brief in Mandarin: "To Yuan Chang vessels, you are being monitored. Leave these waters or face consequences." The response came quickly, in perfect English. "This frequency is restricted. Identify yourself." "You know these waters are protected," Jake continued, ignoring their demand. "The blue whale is off limits." A new voice joined the channel, confident and amused. "Ah, a conservationist with military equipment. Interesting. But you're out of your depth, friend. This is business, not personal." "Making it personal was your first mistake," Jake replied, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "Bringing military tactics into my waters was your second." Laughter crackled over the radio. "Your waters, and who exactly are you?" "Someone who knows that your portside vessel has a sealed delivery vehicle hidden under its false hull. Someone who recognizes the frequency-hopping pattern of your secure communications. Someone who's already documented enough violations to bring in federal task forces." The laughter stopped. A long pause followed. "Perhaps we can discuss compensation for your discretion," the voice finally offered. Jake watched as Grace surfaced again, her massive form silhouetted against the setting sun. He'd seen too many beautiful things destroyed by human greed. Not this time. Not in his waters. "You have 1 hour to clear this area," he stated flatly. "After that, I demonstrate my own technology. Trust me, you won't like the sales pitch." Switching off the radio, Jake began preparations. He knew they wouldn't leave. Men like that never did. They'd see his warning as a challenge, maybe even try to eliminate the threat he posed. Standard procedure would be to send a team to deal with him quietly. Let them come. He'd spent 15 years perfecting the art of underwater warfare. These waters were his home now, and he'd learned long ago that the most dangerous predators weren't always the ones you could see. Grace's distinctive call echoed through his underwater senses. She was staying close, almost as if she knew what was coming. What she didn't know was that her protector had once earned his call sign by turning the ocean itself into a weapon. These hunters were about to learn why. Night fell over the Alaskan waters, but darkness had always been Jake's ally. Through his military-grade thermal imaging, he watched 3 high-speed vessels break away from the main hunting ships, cutting through the water on an intercept course. With the Northern Star. "Right on schedule," he muttered, activating a series of underwater sensors he'd deployed over the past year. These waters had been his home, and he'd prepared them accordingly. The first warning came as a subtle vibration. Through his hull, the hunters had activated their acoustic weapons, trying to disorient any whales in the area. Grace's distress call echoed through Jake's specialized equipment, but she was safely deep now, beyond their immediate reach. "Target vessel in sight," crackled a voice over their supposedly secure channel. "No visible defense capabilities. Standard. Fishing equipment only." Jake smiled grimly. They were about to learn how deceiving appearances could be. The lead vessel approached confidently, its crew probably expecting to find an outmatched conservationist with stolen military radio codes. Their first hint that something was wrong came when their sophisticated electronics suddenly flickered. "We're losing navigation," one boat reported. "Some kind of interference." "Maintain visual contact," ordered their leader. "Close in and—" Their communications died mid-sentence as Jake activated his first countermeasure, a localized electromagnetic pulse that turned their million-dollar hunting technology into expensive paperweights. The boats switched to backup systems, but now they were running blind, their formation broken. Jake's voice cut through their backup frequencies. "Last warning! These waters are protected!" Their response was predictable. 2 boats accelerated toward him while the third held back, establishing a firing position with what was probably an anti-ship weapon. They still thought they were dealing with an amateur. Jake reached for controls that hadn't been touched since his SEAL days. Underwater strobes flashed to life, creating disorienting patterns beneath the waves. Focused sound pulses, originally installed to communicate with whales, now transmitted at frequencies that played havoc with the hunters' inner ears. The lead boat's crew was professional, fighting through the disorientation, but they'd lost their advantage. As they drew alongside the Northern Star, they found an empty deck. Jake was already in the water. 15 years as a SEAL had taught him that the ocean itself was a weapon. The hunter's night vision equipment, adjusted for surface observation, was useless against a threat from below. One by one, their propellers snagged on submerged cables, defensive measures Jake had placed months ago, disguised as fishing gear. The boats lurched to a stop, their crews suddenly realizing how vulnerable they were. "Look alive, boys," a voice cut through their confusion. Jake stood on the deck of their lead vessel, water streaming from his tactical gear. Two crew members reached for weapons but found themselves disarmed with practiced efficiency. "Impressive." "Set up," came a new voice. The third boat's commander stepped into view, his bearing military. "You're not just some random conservationist, are you?" "Just a fisherman," Jake replied calmly, "who believes some waters should remain undisturbed." "You're interfering with a multi-million-dollar operation," the commander stated. "Your employers made a mistake," Jake cut him off. "They brought military tactics to waters protected by someone who wrote the book on maritime warfare. Take a message back to them. The blue whale is off limits. These hunting grounds are closed." The commander's eyes narrowed. "You can't protect these waters forever. Watch me." As if in response, Grace surfaced nearby, her massive form dwarfing the hunting boats. She wasn't fleeing anymore, like she knew the hunters had met their match. When the boats limped back to their motherships, they carried more than a message. They carried the certainty that these waters had a guardian, one who could turn their own tactics against them. But Jake knew this was just the beginning. The Yuan Chang Syndicate wouldn't give up their prize easily. They'd return with more men, better equipment, and a grudge. Good. Let them come. Some predators needed to learn the hard way that not all prey was defenseless. Dawn broke over troubled waters. Jake stood at his radar, watching the hunting ships regroup. They'd withdrawn to international waters but hadn't left the area. Their electronic signatures showed increased activity. They were calling in reinforcements. Sarah's voice crackled over the secure channel. "Coast Guard's 18 hours out at best. FBI's maritime task force is mobilizing, but bureaucracy's slowing them down. Jake, they're picking up massive vessel movements from the west." His satellite phone buzzed. "Marcus Echo Rodriguez. Yuan Chang deploying their prime asset. Ghost ship confirmed moving from Japanese waters. Full tactical complement. They're not hunting whales anymore, brother. They're hunting you." Jake studied the incoming data. The ghost ship wasn't just a whaling vessel. It was a converted military platform designed for black operations. Its appearance meant the syndicate was shifting from commercial hunting to full tactical engagement. "How long?" Jake asked. 24 hours, maybe less," Marcus replied. "Listen, I can have a team there in 12... "No," Jake cut him off. "Can't risk official involvement, not yet." But he knew he couldn't handle this alone anymore, not against a military-grade operation. His fingers moved across the satellite phone's keypad, typing a message he'd hoped never to send. "Neptune protocol active. Waters compromised." The response was immediate. 4 acknowledgements from 4 different locations. His old team, the men who'd followed him through the world's deadliest waters, were coming. Grace surfaced near his boat, her presence a reminder of what he was fighting for. The massive blue whale seemed to study him with her ancient eye, as if sensing the weight of his decision. "You've got company, Jake," Sarah reported urgently. 3 helicopters incoming. Look military. They were moving faster than he'd anticipated. The syndicate wasn't just escalating. They were bringing the full force of their operation down on these waters. The message was clear. No more subtle hunting, no more careful negotiations. They were going to take what they wanted and eliminate anyone who stood in their way. Jake's military equipment picked up their tactical frequencies. They weren't even trying to hide anymore. Multiple teams, professional operators, coordinating a full-scale assault. They planned to lock down these waters, create a killing zone where they could hunt without interference. Sarah, get the word out. All civilian boats clear the area. Total exclusion zone. What about you? Jake watched Grace dive deep, her massive form disappearing beneath the waves. She was trusting him to protect these waters, to keep her safe. He'd walked away from violence once, chosen a peaceful life. But sometimes protecting peace meant being willing to wage war. I'll buy time until my team arrives. Then we show these hunters why they should have stayed in deeper waters. His decision made, Jake began preparations. The Northern Star wasn't just a fishing boat. It was a carefully crafted weapons platform, designed by someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of maritime combat. Every net could become a trap, every fishing line a garrote, every depth charge a strategic weapon. Getting movement from the hunting ships, Sarah reported. They're launching fast boats, multiple vectors. Jake's phone lit up with another message. From Marcus, team en route, hold fast, Poseidon, the tide's about to turn. Somewhere out in the darkness, Grace's haunting call echoed through the depths. She wasn't running anymore. Like she knew the battle for her survival was about to begin. Jake powered up systems that had lain dormant for years. Screens flickered to life, displaying tactical overlays and combat telemetry. The peaceful fisherman was gone. In his place stood a warrior who'd earned his callsign in the world's most dangerous waters. Time to remind them, he muttered, watching the approaching forces, why some waters have guardians. The hunters were coming in force, but they were about to learn that in these waters they weren't the apex predators. They were sailing into the domain of Poseidon, and he was done playing defense. The first of Jake's team arrived as sunset painted the Alaskan waters in blood-red hues. Marcus Echo Rodriguez's boat appeared to be a battered commercial fishing vessel, but Jake recognized the subtle modifications. Gun ports disguised as fishing gear, military-grade radar hidden beneath weather-worn panels. Still living the quiet life, I see. Marcus grinned as he stepped aboard the Northern Star, his muscled frame carrying the same lethal grace it had during their SEAL days. Behind the humor in his eyes lay the sharp focus of a trained operator, assessing a tactical situation. It was quiet, Jake replied, leading him to the command center he'd set up in his cabin. Until these waters got crowded. Marcus whistled at the array of military-grade equipment. Nice setup. Been planning for trouble? Always. Jake activated his tactical display, showing the positions of the hunting vessels. Yuan Chang's ghost ship will be here by dawn. They're bringing enough firepower to start a small war. Good. Thing we're bringing enough to end one. Marcus keyed his radio. Thunder, lightning, you're clear to approach. Two more boats emerged from the gathering darkness. Like Marcus's vessel, they appeared unremarkable at first glance, but Jake knew better. Thunder was piloted by Kate Storm Chen, their former demolitions expert. Lightning carried Mike Pulse Wilson, their electronic warfare specialist. The team gathered in Jake's cabin, falling into the familiar rhythm of mission planning. Kate spread out detailed charts of the area, while Mike connected his electronic warfare suite to Jake's systems. Ghost ships no joke, Mike reported, pulling up classified specs on his tablet. Modified Chinese maritime operations platform. Full tactical loadout, including helicopter support and underwater warfare capabilities. They've got at least 30 professional operators, Kate added, plus their regular crew. Thermal imaging shows weapon emplacements covering all angles. They're set up for serious confrontation. What about the whale? Marcus asked, studying the acoustic tracking data. Jake switched displays, showing Grace's movement patterns. She's staying in the area. Something's different about her behavior. She's not just passing through, she's protecting something. Kate's eyes widened as she analyzed the data. Jake, these sound patterns. She's not alone. There's a calf. The revelation hit hard. Grace wasn't just a target, she was a mother defending her young. The stakes had just gotten higher. That's why they want her, Mike said grimly. Blue whale calves are even more valuable than adults on the black market. 2 targets for 1 operation. Not going to happen, Jake stated flatly. His team nodded, understanding the steel in his voice. They'd followed that tone through the world's worst combat zones. Last member of the band's incoming, Marcus reported, checking his phone. Alex Shadow Patel. She's got eyes on the ghost ship. Says they're loading some kind of new tech into their hunting boats. Jake's tactical display beeped with an incoming transmission. Alex's voice came through, crisp and professional. Got eyes on their new weapon. It's bad, Jake. Some kind of focused acoustic cannon. Military grade, but modified for whale hunting. They're planning to test it at first light. The team processed this information, their training translating technical details into tactical implications. An acoustic cannon could disorient or even kill marine life at range, while leaving no evidence for international authorities. They're not just hunting anymore, Kate observed. This is weapons testing. They want to prove their technology works. Which means we're not just protecting Grace, Mike added. We're preventing them from developing a weapon that could devastate marine populations worldwide. Jake moved to his weapons locker, entering a complex code. The panel slid open to reveal specialized equipment, gear designed for the kind of warfare most people didn't know existed. We've got 6 hours until dawn, he said, laying out the gear. They'll expect us to play defense, protect the whale, try to hold them off until authorities arrive. That's not how this goes, Marcus smiled, recognizing the tactical shift. We take the fight to them. Exactly. Jake activated a 3D hologram of the operating area. They think they're the hunters. Time to remind them what it feels like to be hunted. The team gathered around the display, falling into their old roles. Kate began marking attack vectors, while Mike mapped electronic warfare opportunities. Marcus analyzed the ghost ship's vulnerabilities, his experience with maritime operations providing crucial insight. Their new weapons, their weak point. Alex's voice added over the comm. They'll have to test it in controlled conditions. That means getting close to the whale. Which means we know exactly where they'll be, Jake concluded. We use their hunt against them. The plan took shape quickly, each team member adding their expertise. Kate's knowledge of underwater demolitions would turn the ocean itself into a weapon. Mike's electronic warfare capabilities would blind their sophisticated hunting technology. Marcus and Alex would handle direct action if needed. What about Grace? Kate asked, studying the whale's movement patterns. She's not going to abandon her calf. She doesn't have to, Jake replied. We're not here to make her run. We're here to make these waters safe for her. The team continued preparations as night deepened. Equipment was checked, weapons were prepared, and contingencies were planned. They moved with the quiet efficiency of operators who'd faced worse odds in deadlier waters. Grace's call echoed through the depths, a reminder of what they were fighting for. Her calf responded, the sounds captured by Jake's underwater sensors, translated into visual patterns on his displays. Look at that, Mike said softly, studying the sound patterns. They're not just communicating, they're singing together. Jake watched the data flow across his screens. 2 lives, ancient and new, trusting in waters they thought were safe. He'd walked away from violence once, chosen a simpler life. But sometimes the simplest things were worth fighting for. Get ready, he ordered, watching multiple contacts approaching on his long-range sensors. Ghost ships pushing their timeline. They'll be here in 4 hours. His team moved to their positions, each one a master of their craft. They weren't just former SEALs anymore. They were guardians of these waters, protectors of something older and more important than human greed. The hunters were coming, bringing technology and tactics designed to kill. But they were about to learn why some waters remained forbidden, why some creatures had guardians. Dawn was approaching, and with it a reminder of why his team had once been the most feared unit in maritime special operations. They weren't just fighting for a whale anymore. They were fighting for a mother, a child, and waters that should remain free from the worst of human nature. The hunt was about to begin, but this time the hunters would become the hunted. First light revealed the ghost ship in all its deadly glory. The converted military vessel loomed on the horizon, its modified hull bristling with concealed weapons. 8 smaller hunting boats had already deployed, their sleek forms cutting through the morning mist like sharks circling prey. "They're not even trying to hide anymore," Marcus observed from his position. His vessel, now rigged for combat, held station a mile east of Jake's position. "Counting 36 armed personnel," Alex reported from her concealed observation post. "Elite operators, Chinese Special Forces training. They're running a search pattern, but it's not standard hunting formation." Jake watched the tactical display as Kate and Mike moved their vessels into predetermined positions. The hunters were creating a net of sound and sonar, trying to trap Grace and her calf in an ever-tightening circle. "They're herding them," Kate's voice came through, tight with controlled anger, using the acoustic pulses to drive them toward the testing zone. Grace's distress calls registered on Jake's instruments, but they were different now, more protective than fearful. The massive blue whale was positioning herself between the hunters and her calf, her ancient instincts responding to a threat as old as the seas themselves. "Showtime," Jake transmitted. "Execute Neptune Protocol." The response was immediate and coordinated. Mike's electronic warfare suite came to life, flooding the hunters' frequencies with false readings. Phantom whale signatures appeared on their sonar, confusing their careful search pattern. "Multiple contacts," one of the hunting boats reported, their professional calm cracking. "Target signatures in all directions." Kate's contribution came. Next, underwater charges, carefully placed during the night, detonated in sequence. Not close enough to damage, but perfectly positioned to create acoustic corridors, false paths that would draw the hunters away from Grace's actual position. "They're splitting up," Alex reported with satisfaction. 4 boats breaking formation to chase ghosts. Jake watched the tactical display as the hunting force fragmented. Their coordinated search pattern dissolved as each boat pursued what they thought was their quarry. The ghost ship's commander wasn't fooled for long. "Reform the search grid," he ordered over their command channel. "Primary target only. Ignore secondary signatures." But the damage was done. Their careful hunt had turned into confusion, their military precision shattered by an enemy they couldn't see. "Phase 2, Jake commanded. "Mark their leadership." Marcus's boat, appearing to all sensors like a simple fishing vessel, drifted into the hunting zone. The ghost ship's crew, focused on regaining control of their operation, paid it little attention. "Target acquired," Marcus transmitted. "Range master identified on the command deck. He's the one controlling their acoustic weapon." The weapon itself was visible now, mounted on the ghost ship's forward deck. A massive array of sophisticated equipment that represented millions in research and development. This hunt wasn't just about capturing whales. It was about proving their technology worked. "Time to introduce ourselves," Jake decided. He keyed his radio to their command frequency. "Ghost ship, this is your final warning. These waters are protected." Laughter crackled over the channel. "Ah, the Fisherman returns," a confident voice responded. "With friends this time. Impressive electronic warfare capabilities, but ultimately futile. We have you significantly outgunned." "Do you?" Jake switched to a private channel. "Kate, show them why we don't need guns." Kate's specialized charges detonated beneath 2 of the hunting boats. Not enough to damage, but perfectly calibrated to disable their sophisticated sonar arrays. The vessels lurched as their electronics died, their crews suddenly blind in increasingly hostile waters. "What was that about outgunning us?" Jake asked mildly, switching back to their channel. The ghost ship's response was immediate and aggressive. Their weapon powered up, its acoustic pulse designed to incapacitate whales now directed at Jake's position, but they were firing at a shadow. The northern star had already moved, leaving behind a sonic reflector that made it appear stationary to their instruments. Multiple civilian vessels approaching from the south, Alex warned. Local fishing boats. They're not responding. To warnings, Jake checked his radar. Tom Henderson's boat led a group of local fishermen, their vessels moving to block the hunters' escape routes. They weren't part of the plan, but they'd chosen their side in this fight. "These are our waters," Tom's voice crackled over the public channel, "and we don't take kindly to poachers." The ghost ship's commander faced a rapidly deteriorating situation. His hunting boats were scattered, his sonar confused by multiple contacts, and now civilian witnesses were arriving. But he still had one card to play. "Weapon at full power," he ordered. "Wide dispersal pattern. Let's see how these protectors handle mass casualties in their precious marine life." "Mike," Jake transmitted calmly, "show them what happens when you bring untested weapons to a technical fight." Mike's electronic warfare suite had been analyzing the weapon's emissions since its first activation. Now he deployed a precisely calibrated countermeasure. The acoustic cannon's next pulse reflected back on itself, creating a feedback loop that sent its operators scrambling to shut it down. "Weapon systems overloading," came the panicked report. "Controls not responding." "Shut it down," the commander ordered, but it was too late. The massive array exploded in a shower of sparks and twisted metal, its sophisticated technology reduced to scrap by its own power, years of research and millions in development destroyed in seconds. "That's one way to fail a weapons test," Marcus observed dryly. Grace surfaced then, her massive form breaching the waves near the ghost ship. She was no longer fleeing, no longer afraid. Her calf rose beside her, tiny by comparison but equally majestic. Together they presented a sight that reminded everyone present of what they were really fighting for. "Look at them," Kate breathed. "They're not just surviving, they're thriving." The ghost ship's commander faced a choice: escalate to full military engagement with civilian witnesses present, or withdraw and preserve what was left of his operation. His decision was broadcast in rapid-fire Mandarin to his remaining forces. "They're pulling back," Alex translated. "All vessels ordered to withdraw to international waters." Jake watched the hunting boats retreat, their precise military formation now ragged and disorganized, but he knew this wasn't over. The Yuan Chang Syndicate had too much invested in their operation to give up after one setback. "They'll be back," Marcus stated what they all knew. "Yes," Jake agreed, watching Grace and her calf swim freely in the morning sun. "But next time they'll know what they're really hunting." The local fishing boats remained on station, their crews witnessing something few humans ever saw: a blue whale and her calf swimming without fear in protected waters. Tom's voice summed up the moment perfectly. Some things are worth protecting, some waters need guardians. The sun climbed higher, illuminating waters that had just witnessed a different kind of battle. One fought not with traditional weapons, but with technology, tactics, and an unshakable determination to protect something precious. The hunters had come expecting to find helpless prey. Instead, they discovered that in these waters, they were the ones being hunted. The aftermath of battle brought new complications. Sarah arrived at the Northern Star as Jake's team regrouped, her expression a mix of awe and concern. "Coast Guard's asking questions," she reported, setting up her laptop. "That weapons test triggered every seismic monitor in the region. They're calling it an underwater acoustic anomaly, but they know it was man-made." Mike was already working on that problem, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "Feeding them data suggesting underwater thermal vents. Should keep the scientists busy for weeks, but natural phenomena couldn't explain everything. The ghost ship's retreat had left evidence: disabled hunting boats, scattered equipment, and most importantly, witnesses. Local fishermen had seen. Too much to maintain complete deniability. "We've got another problem," Kate called from the deck, where she'd been monitoring underwater acoustics. "Grace's calf is having trouble diving. That last acoustic pulse might have affected its equilibrium." Jake moved to the sonar display, studying the whale's signatures. The calf's movements were erratic, its dive patterns irregular. Grace stayed close, trying to support her baby, but her calls carried clear distress. "How bad?" he asked. "Could be temporary," Kate replied, but her voice carried doubt. "But if it can't dive properly, it can't feed. And if it can't feed—" She didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what was at stake. "Yuan Chang will know too," Marcus added grimly. "The moment they realize the calf is vulnerable, they'll be back. Wounded prey is easier to hunt." Alex's voice crackled over the radio. "Movement on the ghost ship. They're launching drones, probably trying to confirm the calf's condition." Jake studied his tactical display, watching multiple problems converge. They'd won the first battle, but now faced a more complex challenge. A wounded whale calf couldn't be protected by technology or tactics alone. "Sarah, what resources do we have for marine mammal rehabilitation?" "Local facilities aren't equipped for blue whales," she answered, already making calls. "Nearest qualified help is in San Diego. Even if we could get authorization, transport would be extremely risky." "Can't move them anyway," Kate interjected. "Not with Yuan Chang watching. The moment we try any kind of rescue operation, they'll strike." The team gathered in Jake's cabin, each bringing their expertise to a problem that couldn't be solved with their usual methods. This wasn't about fighting anymore, it was about saving a life. "What about passive protection?" Marcus suggested. "Create a safe zone where they can recover naturally." Mike shook his head. "Ghost ships got too much surveillance capability. They'll monitor any fixed position, then we move with them," Jake decided. His team looked at him, recognizing the tone that had led them through impossible missions. "We don't try to rescue them. We become their escort." The plan took shape quickly. They would create a mobile protection zone, using their boats to shield the whales while maintaining the appearance of normal fishing operations. Local boats would provide additional cover, making it impossible for the hunters to approach without witnesses. "We can't keep this up forever," Alex warned. "Teams running on minimal sleep and we're burning through resources." She was right. The sophisticated electronic countermeasures that had driven off the ghost ship required enormous power. Every hour of operation drained their reserves. "We don't need forever," Jake replied, studying Grace's movements on the sonar. "We just need enough time for the calf to recover. Nature will do the rest." Grace surfaced near the northern star, close enough for them to see her eye, ancient, intelligent, and somehow trusting. She knew they were helping, Jake realized. Somehow she understood they were fighting for her baby. "They're coming back," Sarah reported suddenly, checking her satellite feed. "Ghost ships changed course. They're not retreating anymore." "How long?" Marcus asked. 6 hours, maybe less. "And they're not alone. 2 more vessels just joined them." Jake watched Grace dive again, her movements careful, protective. She wouldn't abandon her calf, wouldn't flee to safer waters, which meant they couldn't either. "All right," he said finally. "We've got 6 hours to turn these waters into a fortress. Kate, I need those remaining charges repositioned. Mike, start working on a communications blackout zone. Marcus, coordinate with the local boats. I want eyes on every approach vector." "What about the calf?" Sarah asked softly. Jake moved to his secure locker, pulling out equipment he'd hoped not to need. "We protect it, whatever it takes." His team dispersed to their tasks, each understanding that they'd crossed a line. This wasn't just about stopping illegal hunting anymore. They were fighting for something more fundamental. The right of a mother to protect her child, the principle that some things were worth any cost to defend. In the deepening afternoon, Grace's calls echoed through their instruments. Not distress now, but something else. A song shared between mother and child, ancient and pure, carrying across waters that had suddenly become a battlefield of a different kind. The hunters were coming back, bringing more weapons, more technology, more determination to claim their prize. But they would find these waters changed, defended not just by former seals, but by an entire community united in protecting something precious. Some fights were about more than victory. Some battles had to be won, not for glory or profit, but because losing was unthinkable. Night operations had always been Jake's specialty, and these waters were his domain. Through military-grade thermal imaging, he watched the ghost ship's support vessels take up attack positions. They were being smarter this time, more cautious, treating this like the military operation it had become. 3 high-speed interceptors approaching from the east, Alex reported from her concealed position. Different configuration than before. They're carrying dive teams. Makes sense, Marcus added, his voice grim. They lost their fancy tech, so now they're going old school. Underwater hunters. Jake studied the sonar display showing Grace and her calf. The baby's movements were still irregular but improving. Every hour of rest increased its chances of recovery. Every hour they had to protect. Multiple drone launches detected, Mike cut in. They're mapping our positions. Different frequencies. This time, they're learning. The hunters had adapted quickly, shifting tactics after their first failure. Instead of relying on their acoustic weapon, they were preparing for close quarters, underwater warfare. Their domain, or so they thought. Execute siren protocol, Jake ordered. His team's response was immediate. Kate's specialized underwater charges, activated not as weapons but as a web of sensors, creating a 3-dimensional map of everything moving beneath the waves. Mike's electronic warfare suite began selectively jamming the drone's transmissions, creating dead zones in their surveillance. First dive team entering the water, Alex reported. Bearing 270. Professional gear, rebreathers, probably ex-military. Let them come, Jake replied calmly. Time to remind them why they called me Poseidon. He moved to his specialized equipment locker, pulling out gear he hadn't used since his SEAL days. Within minutes, he was in the water, becoming one with the darkness he'd mastered years ago. The hunters were good, their movements smooth, their formations tight. But they were hunting in waters Jake had prepared for exactly this kind of fight. Every rock, every current, every depth change was mapped in his mind. Contact, came Alex's whispered warning. 6 divers, moving in a standard search pattern. Jake watched them approach through his advanced underwater optics. They moved with military precision, but they'd made a crucial mistake. They were looking for whales, not for predators like themselves. The first hunter never saw what hit him. One moment he was scanning the depths, the next his equipment was disabled and he was rising to the surface on his emergency buoy. His teammates turned at the disturbance, but Jake was already gone, a shadow moving through shadows. Second team entering the water, Marcus reported. They're trying to flank our position. Grace's call echoed through the depths, her massive form moving to shield her calf. The baby whale's distress was drawing the hunters right where Jake wanted them. 2 more divers found their equipment mysteriously malfunctioning, forced to surface. The remaining hunters tightened their formation, finally realizing they weren't the only ones hunting in these waters. Ghost ships getting nervous, Mike reported with satisfaction. They're trying to recall their teams. Too late. Jake moved among them like the ghost he'd been trained to be, appearing and vanishing before they could respond. It wasn't about hurting them. It was about sending a message. These waters had a guardian, one who could strike from anywhere and disappear without trace. Multiple assets surfacing, Alex called out. They're aborting the operation. The hunters retreated. To their vessels, their careful military operation unraveled by an enemy they couldn't find. Jake surfaced near Grace, watching the ghost ship's commanders try to understand what had happened to their elite dive teams. Remember when you used to do this for fun? Marcus asked over the radio, amusement in his voice. Still do, Jake replied, checking his equipment. Difference is, now it matters more. Grace and her calf swam past, their massive forms silhouetted against the moonlight. The baby's movements were stronger now, its diving more controlled. Given time, it would recover fully. Time the hunters wouldn't give them willingly. They're regrouping, Sarah reported from her monitoring station. Multiple communications with their home base. Whatever they're planning next, it's big. Jake watched the ghost ship's silhouette against the horizon. They'd learned tonight that their tactical advantages could be turned against them. Their response would be to escalate further, bring in more forces, more equipment. Good. Let them. You'd come with everything they had. These waters had seen worse threats, and their guardian had turned darkness itself into a weapon. The hunt wasn't over. But now, the hunters knew what it felt like to be hunted. Dawn brought more than just light to the Alaskan waters. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and Sarah's weather radar showed a massive storm system approaching. Category 2, maybe 3, she reported, studying the data. Visibility will be near zero. Waves up to 30 feet. Under normal circumstances, such weather would drive ships to harbor, but Jake knew better. For hunters willing to risk everything, a storm wasn't an obstacle. It was an opportunity. They're moving. Alex's voice crackled through static. Ghost. Ships launching vessels. They're using the approaching storm as cover. Jake watched his tactical display as multiple contacts emerged from the hunting fleet. They were taking a massive risk, operating in these conditions, but they'd calculated that the storm would blind the normal protective measures: civilian witnesses, Coast Guard patrols, satellite surveillance. "How's the calf?" he asked Kate, who'd been monitoring the whale's movements. "Stronger, but not strong enough for this weather." Her voice carried professional concern. "If they can't dive deep enough to escape the storm." She didn't need to finish. Surface conditions would soon become lethal for a wounded whale calf. "Team, report positions," Jake commanded, his mind already formulating plans. "Thunder holding northwest quadrant," Kate responded. "But these waves are already affecting my sonar coverage." "Lightning in position," Mike added. "Electronic warfare suite at 60%. Storms interfering with everything." "Echo on standby," Marcus confirmed. "But visibility's dropping fast. 10 minutes max before we're flying blind." Grace's call echoed through their hydrophones, more urgent now. She could sense the approaching danger, both from the storm and the hunters using it as cover. They're not trying to catch them, Jake realized, watching the hunting boat's movement pattern. They're going to drive them into the storm. Let nature do their work for them. It was brutally efficient. In calm waters, they'd proven unable to capture the whales. But if they could force them into lethal surface conditions... "Sarah, what's beneath us?" Jake demanded. She checked her charts. Deep water trench, 2 miles down, but there's an underwater ridge system to the east. If they drive them that way, the whales will be trapped between shallow water and storm. Waves. The hunters had done their research. They were using the local geography as a weapon, turning the very waters Jake had sworn to protect into a deadly trap. Thunder cracked overhead as the storm's leading edge reached them. Rain began hammering the decks while waves grew steadily higher. "Lost visual on 3 hunting boats," Alex reported, frustration in her voice. "This weather's better than any camouflage." Jake studied his options, watching Grace try to guide her calf into deeper water. The baby was stronger, but still not fully recovered. They wouldn't survive the storm's full fury. "New contacts!" Mike's warning carried urgency. "They're not just using boats, underwater vehicles coming up from the deep, some kind of automated hunters." The ghost ship had revealed another weapon. Autonomous underwater drones, programmed to pursue and harass marine life. In this weather, with their normal defenses blind, such weapons would be nearly impossible to stop. "They're herding them straight into the storm cell," Marcus observed. Grimly, "Kill zone will be perfect. No witnesses, no evidence, just another tragic loss to bad weather." Jake felt Grace's next call through the hull of his boat. Not fear, but determination. The mother whale wasn't going to abandon her calf, even if it meant facing the storm's fury. "Kate," he commanded, "deploy your remaining charges along the ridgeline. Create a sound barrier. That'll use everything we have left," she warned. "Do it." His team moved with practiced efficiency, even as the storm intensified around them. They couldn't stop the weather, couldn't defeat nature itself, but they could change the battlefield. "Charges set," Kate reported, awaiting detonation order. Jake watched Grace make another attempt to lead her calf to safety, only to be turned. Back by the hunters' underwater drones, the storm's full force was minutes away. "Sarah, get me everything you have on that underwater ridge system. Every cave, every crevice." "You can't be serious," Marcus cut in, realizing his plan. "In this weather, it's suicide. So is doing nothing." Jake moved to his equipment locker, pulling out his most advanced underwater gear. "Kate, detonate on. My mark. Mike, blind everything you can. Marcus, Alex, keep them occupied up top." Grace's call echoed once more through the depths. Mother and child caught between hunters and a killing storm, trusting in waters that had become a battleground. "Sometimes," Jake said softly, checking his gear, "the only way to win is to change the rules of the hunt." The storm broke over them in full fury, turning day into night. But in these waters, darkness had always been his ally. Lightning split the sky as Jake descended into the turbulent waters. Even with his advanced gear, the visibility was near zero, the storm turning the sea into a chaos of currents and debris. But his sonar still worked, painting an acoustic picture of the underwater battlefield. Multiple drones converging on the whale's position, Mike reported through the underwater comm system. "Counting 8, no, 12 autonomous hunters. They're boxing them in." The underwater drones moved with artificial precision, their programming unaffected by the storm above. Each one was a torpedo-sized unit equipped with acoustic weapons, smaller versions of the device they'd destroyed on the ghost ship. Grace and her calf appeared on Jake's sonar, their massive forms trying to find a path through the drone net. But every time they moved toward deeper water, the machines forced them back, driving them toward the deadly surface waves. "Charges ready," Kate confirmed. "But Jake, if we detonate with you down there—" "Do it," he ordered, pushing deeper. "Mark my position and avoid my sector." The underwater charges detonated in sequence, creating a wall of sound that disrupted the drone's sonar. Several units immediately lost tracking, their programming confused by the acoustic chaos. But the ghost ship's commanders adapted quickly. "Manual override engaged," Mike reported. "They're taking direct control of the drones. These aren't standard units, they're military prototypes." Jake watched as the machines reformed their hunting pattern, now controlled by human operators, who understood tactical warfare. They'd turned this underwater domain into a three-dimensional battlefield. 4 minutes to full storm impact, Sarah warned. "Those waves will kill anything on the surface." Grace's call echoed through the depths, guiding her calf away from the approaching drones. But the hunters had positioned their machines perfectly, using the underwater ridge to limit escape options. "Multiple vessels moving into position above," Alex reported through the storm static. "They're dropping some kind of net system." The trap was almost complete. Drive the whales up with drones, catch them in reinforced nets when the storm forced them to surface. Clinical, professional, lethal, perfect. "Now you see why I picked this spot," Jake transmitted to his team. "Kate, remember Panama?" A pause, then understanding in her voice. "The pressure trap? Jake, that was different. We had support ships, backup teams. We have something better." He switched frequencies, calling to the local fishing boats that had stayed despite the storm. "All vessels, execute pattern echo, just like we practiced." Through his sonar, Jake watched as civilian boats moved into precise positions. Not random movement, a carefully choreographed dance designed to create specific wave patterns. "Drones adapting to new surface contacts," Mike reported. "There, Programming is prioritizing threat assessment. Exactly as planned, the autonomous hunters couldn't ignore potential threats to their mission, forcing their human operators to split attention between multiple targets. Ghost ship launching backup. Drones, Alex warned. They're not taking chances. Jake reached the underwater ridge, finding exactly what Sarah's charts had promised. A network of caves and crevices large enough for whales to navigate, but too complex for automated hunters to follow. "Grace," he whispered, though she couldn't possibly hear him. "Time to trust me." He deployed his own device, not a weapon, but a specialized transmitter broadcasting specific frequencies. Whale song. Not random patterns, but sequences he'd recorded from Grace herself, modified to suggest safe passage. The massive whale responded, leading her calf toward his position. The drones followed, their operators sensing victory as their targets moved toward the apparently dead end of the ridge. "They're powering up acoustic weapons," Mike called urgently. 20 seconds to discharge." Jake waited until the last possible moment, until the drones were fully committed to their attack run, until Grace and her calf were perfectly positioned. Then he triggered Kate's final set of charges. The underwater detonations were precisely calculated, not to damage, but to trigger something more powerful, an underwater landslide. Tons of rock and sediment crashed down, creating a natural barrier between the whales and their hunters. Through his sonar, Jake watched Grace guide her calf into the safety of the cave network. The drones, trapped on the other side of the rockfall, tried to follow, but their programming couldn't navigate the complex terrain. But this was only the first phase. The real trap was yet to come. The ghost ship's response was immediate and furious. "Launch all remaining units," their commander ordered over channels they thought were secure. "I want those caves mapped and breached. Nothing escapes." Through the storm-churned waters, Jake watched their backup drones deploy. Smaller, faster units designed for close-quarter hunting in confined spaces. The hunters were committing everything to this operation now. 36 new contacts, Mike reported. "They're not even trying to hide their military hardware anymore. These are Chinese Navy prototypes, fresh from the factory." The revelation hit hard. This wasn't just about hunting whales anymore. The Yuanchang Syndicate was using this operation to test next-generation warfare technology. Grace and her calf were just convenient targets for weapons that could change the future of naval combat. "Jake," Marcus called urgently, "we've got bigger problems. Ghost ships moving in. They're not letting a storm stop them." The massive vessel's silhouette appeared through the rain, its specialized hull designed to handle these conditions. They were done with subtle hunting. Now they were bringing their full military might to bear. "Sarah, how long until the storm?" "It peaks. 10 minutes, maybe less." "Jake, they're not going to survive this. None of us are if we stay here." She was right. The waves were becoming monstrous, the kind that could break ships in half. Even Grace, massive as she was, wouldn't survive, being caught in that fury. "Status on the calf?" he asked Kate. "Stronger. The rest helped. But these caves won't protect them from what's coming. That underwater ridge is going to channel the storm surge right through there." Jake studied his tactical display, watching. The hunter-killer drones tried to navigate the cave network. They were learning, their AI adapting to the confined space. Soon they'd find a way through. Time for the final play. "Mike, remember that thing we discussed? The thing you said was crazy?" Pause. "The EMP, Jake, that'll fry everything, including our own gear. Not if we time it right." He switched channels. "Marcus, get ready to execute Protocol Deep 6. Kate, prepare for acoustic countermeasure Theta." His team acknowledged, each understanding their part in what was coming. They'd practice this late at night in calmer waters, hoping they'd never need it. "They're breaching the cave network," Alex reported. "First drone units have found a way through." The hunter-killers moved with lethal purpose, their advanced sonar mapping every tunnel and crevice. Behind them, larger units carried enough acoustic Firepower to stun anything living in these waters. Jake watched Grace position herself between the approaching drones and her calf. Even here, trapped and hunted, her instinct was to protect. Ghost ship launching additional support craft, Sarah called out. There, wait, multiple new contacts, bigger ships. Chinese military vessels, Marcus confirmed grimly. They're not even pretending anymore. This is a full Black Ops weapons test now. The revelation should have been shocking, but Jake had suspected this level of involvement from the beginning. The Yuanchang Syndicate was just a cover for something bigger, a military operation using whale hunting as cover for testing next-generation warfare systems. Grace's call echoed through the caves. Not panic, but something else. Trust. Somehow she knew they were her only hope. All units, this is Poseidon, Jake transmitted on their secure channel. Execute Typhoon Protocol on my mark. The storm reached its peak fury, waves towering above. Their vessels, the ghost ship, pressed forward, confident their military-grade technology could handle anything nature threw at them. They were wrong. Sometimes the deadliest trap wasn't the one you could see. Sometimes it was the one that used your own strength against you. Remember, Jake told his team, timing has to be perfect. We only get one shot at this. Through the chaos of the storm, through the darkness of the deep, he watched the hunters commit their full force to the attack. Everything they had, every piece of advanced technology, every military asset, focused on this one operation, exactly as planned. Time to remind them, he said softly, why they used to call these waters the graveyard of arrogance. The storm transformed the Alaskan waters into a maelstrom of unimaginable fury. Waves the size of buildings crashed over vessels designed to withstand the worst nature could offer, but neither the hunters nor the hunted could retreat now. Chinese vessels deploying additional drones, Alex reported through static-filled communications. They're dropping something else. Looks like mines. Smart mines, Mike confirmed, his instruments picking up their signatures. Latest Chinese tech. They're creating a containment grid underwater. The military vessels had surrounded the entire area, turning these waters into a kill box. Their strategy was clear. Nothing would escape the net they'd drawn, not even if it meant revealing classified weapons to the world. 5 minutes until EMP activation range, Marcus called out. If we're doing this, everything has to be perfect. Jake watched through his underwater gear as Grace led her calf deeper into the cave network. The massive blue whale moved with surprising grace through the tight spaces, showing an intelligence that defied natural instinct. She wasn't just hiding, she was following their plan. First wave of hunter-killers has reached the inner chamber, Kate reported. They're starting their acoustic attack. The drones filled the underwater caves with focused sound pulses, trying to disorient their prey. But Jake had prepared for this. Hidden throughout the cave network, dampeners absorbed and redirected the acoustic energy, protecting the whales while creating a maze of false signatures. Ghost ship launching final assault team. Sarah's voice was tight with tension. 6 vessels, heavy weapons. They're not trying to capture anymore. They're going to kill everything in these waters. The hunters had reached their breaking point. If they couldn't have their prize, they'd ensure no one else could either. Standard military doctrine: deny the enemy any potential assets. All units, prepare for typhoon execution, Jake commanded. Kate, status on the charges. Set and armed, waiting for your signal. The underwater explosives they'd planted weren't meant to kill. They were precisely calculated to trigger something far more powerful, a cascade of natural reactions that would turn these waters into a weapon. Multiple targets entering kill zone, Mike reported. Ghost ship is... Wait. They're powering up something massive. Energy readings off the scale. Jake's tactical display showed what they'd feared. The ghost ship was revealing its true nature. Panels opened along its hull, exposing weapon systems that shouldn't exist outside of classified military bases. That's what this was really about. Marcus realized the whale hunt was just cover for weapons testing. They needed a remote location, a believable story. And now they don't care who sees. Alex finished. They're going to demonstrate their full capabilities. The ghost ship's new weapons began to charge, creating electromagnetic disturbances that disrupted every instrument in range. This wasn't just about hunting anymore. This was about showing the world a new kind of warfare. 30 seconds to optimal position, Sarah called out. Storm surge approaching critical mass. Jake watched the tactical display as all the elements aligned. The hunters had brought their full force to bear, committed every asset to this operation. Their arrogance had led them exactly where he wanted them. Grace is in position, Kate reported. Her calf's vitals are strong. They're ready. Through the chaos of the storm, through the electromagnetic interference of charging weapons, Jake sent one final transmission to his team. Execute Typhoon Protocol. Mark. The response was immediate and coordinated. Kate's charges detonated in sequence, not to damage, but to trigger. The underwater ridge, already destabilized by the storm, began to shift. Millions of tons of rock and sediment moved according to carefully calculated patterns. Energy surged from Ghost Ship, Mike warned. They're firing. But the hunters had made their final mistake. Their powerful weapons, designed to dominate these waters, instead became the catalyst for their own defeat. The electromagnetic pulse from their advanced technology interfaced with the natural electrical fields Jake's team had established. The result was beyond even their calculations. A massive electromagnetic pulse erupted from the depths, created by the combination of natural forces and military technology. Every electronic system in range, from the sophisticated hunter-killer drones to the classified weapons on the Ghost Ship, went dark. In the sudden silence, in the eye of the storm, Grace's call echoed through waters that had become a graveyard of human arrogance. But this was just the beginning, because sometimes the deadliest trap wasn't the one that destroyed your weapons. Sometimes it was the one that turned them against you. The electromagnetic pulse triggered a chain reaction that transformed the battlefield. Military-grade vessels drifted powerless, their classified weapons reduced to dead weight. Hunter-killer drones floated uselessly in the turbulent waters, their advanced AI silenced. Direct hit on all electronic systems, Mike confirmed, switching to backup equipment. Ghost Ship is completely dark, their whole fleet's running blind. But the EMP was just phase 1. The underwater charges had triggered something far more dangerous, a controlled underwater landslide that was about to remind everyone why these waters were called treacherous. Seismic activity increasing, Sarah reported urgently. The ridge is collapsing exactly as planned. But Jake, it's bigger than our models predicted. Through his specialized gear, Jake watched the underwater landscape transform. Tons of rock and sediment shifted, creating powerful currents that would trap anything caught in their path. Except for those who knew exactly where to be. Grace is moving, Kate called out. She's taking her calf through the safe channel. They're following the path we mapped. The massive blue whale's intelligence continued to amaze them. She'd understood. Their signals recognized the safe route they'd shown her. Now she led her calf through underwater currents that would tear apart anything else. Multiple mayday calls from the hunting fleet, Alex reported with grim satisfaction. Their backup systems are failing. These waters are too rough for unpowered navigation. The Ghost Ship's commanders faced an impossible situation. Their sophisticated weapons were useless, their hunter-killer drones dead in the water. The storm above and the currents below threatened to destroy their entire fleet. Chinese military vessels attempting to withdraw, Marcus observed. But without power, he didn't need to finish. The carefully engineered currents were pulling everything toward the collapsing ridge. Every ship, every piece of military hardware was being dragged into a trap formed by nature itself. Incoming transmission from Ghost Ship, Mike cut in. They're broadcasting on emergency frequencies, requesting immediate assistance. Jake checked his tactical display. The hunters had become the hunted, their arrogance turned against them by the very waters they'd tried to dominate. But he hadn't forgotten what they really were. Sarah, alert Coast Guard and Navy assets. Tell them we have multiple vessels in distress and suspected foreign military activity in U.S. waters. The trap was complete. In trying to escape, the Chinese vessels would have to reveal themselves to U.S. naval forces. Their classified weapons testing program would be exposed to international scrutiny. Grace is clear of the danger zone, Kate reported with relief. Her calf's movements are strong. They're going to make it. But the victory brought new complications. Through the storm-churned waters, Jake spotted movement from the ghost ship. Their commanders, facing exposure and capture, had chosen a final, desperate action. Multiple launches, Alex warned. They're deploying everything they have left. Torpedoes, depth charges. They're trying to take everything down with them. The Chinese officers were following their training. Deny the enemy any intelligence about their classified technology, even if it meant turning these waters into a graveyard. All units, execute Charybdis Protocol, Jake commanded. His team had prepared for this too. Kate's remaining charges detonated in sequence, creating a network of underwater shockwaves. The carefully timed explosions interfered with the torpedoes' guidance systems, while the churning waters scattered the depth charges harmlessly into the deep. Massive structural failures on the ghost ship, Sarah reported. The currents are tearing it apart. Jake watched through the chaos as the mighty vessel began to break up. Its classified weapons, its secret technology, would soon rest at the bottom of these waters. But he had one final message to deliver. To all vessels, he transmitted on their emergency channel, you have 30 seconds to abandon ship. After that, these waters will remind you why they respect no human arrogance. The response was immediate. Survival pods launched from the dying vessels as their crews chose life over classified secrets. Above, the storm began to ease, as if nature itself was satisfied with the lesson taught. Grace surfaced briefly, her massive form silhouetted against the clearing sky. Her calf rose beside her, their calls echoing across waters that had become their sanctuary once again. They weren't just survivors now. They were living symbols of something more important than military power or human greed. U.S. Navy vessels, approaching from the south, Marcus reported. Looks like the cavalry's finally arriving. But they would find only mysteries, a graveyard of classified technology lost to the deep. Stories of impossible currents and electromagnetic phenomena that defied explanation, and whispered tales of waters that protected their own. Some hunters would never learn, but these waters would always have their guardians. Dawn broke over transformed waters. The storm had passed, leaving behind a graveyard of military ambition. Rescue vessels dotted the horizon, pulling survivors from the wreckage of what would soon become an international incident. Chinese government, already denying everything, Sarah reported, monitoring official channels, claiming their vessels were conducting routine anti-piracy operations. Hard to explain the classified weapons, Marcus observed. Or the hunter-killer drones our local fishing boats are mysteriously hauling up in their nets. Jake watched through his binoculars as Tom Henderson's boat accidentally snagged another piece of advanced military hardware. The local fishermen had turned the cleanup operation into their own kind of hunt, ensuring nothing remained hidden. FBI's moving in, Alex called out. 3 federal vessels approaching from the east. They're carrying their maritime task force. The aftermath would bring questions they couldn't answer. But Jake's team had prepared for this too. Their civilian covers were perfect, their involvement impossible to prove. Sometimes the best defense was becoming part of the background. Grace is surfacing, Kate reported suddenly. 2 miles east. Jake, she's not alone. Through his specialized optics, Jake watched the massive blue whale breach the calm waters. Her calf rose beside her, but they weren't alone. More whales had joined them, an entire pod drawn to these waters by Grace's calls. They're establishing a new territory, Sarah realized, checking her marine biology data. Using these waters as a sanctuary. The hunting grounds have become a safe haven. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The Yuan-Chang Syndicate's attempt to turn this area into a killing zone had instead created something they never intended, a natural preserve protected by the very weapons they'd lost. Multiple FBI boats requesting to board local vessels. Mike reported, standard procedure after a major incident. Let them look, Jake replied calmly. Everything's in order. His team had already disappeared, their specialized equipment hidden or transformed into innocent fishing gear. The Northern Star was once again just another fishing boat, its military modifications invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. "Sir," a young FBI agent called out, approaching Jake's vessel, "we need to ask you some questions about what happened here." Jake played his role perfectly, the helpful local fisherman, concerned but not too knowledgeable. "Terrible storm," he offered. "Never seen anything like it. Lucky anyone survived." The agent's questions were professional, probing. But how could anyone prove that natural phenomena, underwater currents, electromagnetic disturbances, seismic activity, had been carefully engineered by someone who understood these waters better than any hunter? "Chinese diplomatic vessels approaching," Sarah warned through their concealed comms. "They'll want to recover any sensitive technology, but the depths had already claimed their prizes. The classified weapons, the advanced drones, the military secrets. All had been claimed by carefully created underwater currents, channeled into deep trenches where no recovery operation could reach them." Grace surfaced again, closer now. Her calf swam confidently beside her, fully recovered from its ordeal. The other whales followed, their massive forms turning these waters into a display of natural majesty that made human weapons seem small and meaningless. "Look at that," the FBI agent breathed, momentarily distracted from his questions. "I've never seen so many blue whales in one place." "These waters protect their own," Jake replied simply. The agent studied him carefully, perhaps sensing there was more to the story. But what could he prove? That a group of local fishermen had somehow defeated a classified military operation? That they'd turned nature itself into a weapon? "They're calling it a miracle," Sarah reported later, as federal vessels continued their futile investigation. The way the storm and underwater currents seemed to specifically target military vessels while sparing civilian boats. "Sometimes the sea chooses its favorites," Marcus quoted an old SEAL saying, but his eyes were knowing. They'd achieved something few special operations teams ever had, a victory that would remain forever hidden, protecting something truly worth saving. The pod of whales began their song, their ancient voices carrying across waters that had become their sanctuary. Grace led them, her calls carrying a different tone now, not distress or fear, but something that sounded almost like triumph. "Think they'll try again?" Kate asked quietly. Jake watched the federal investigators document what they thought was a natural disaster. Watched the Chinese diplomatic vessels try to explain away their military presence. Watched the whales claim waters that had been cleansed of human arrogance. "They might," he admitted, "but these waters have a new reputation now. Sometimes the best defense isn't what you can prove, it's what you make others believe." The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating waters that held more secrets than any investigation would ever reveal. Sometimes the greatest victories were the ones that looked just like nature taking its course. The weeks following the Alaskan maritime incident brought changes no one had expected. International news covered the mysterious loss of Chinese vessels in U.S. waters, while marine biologists celebrated an unprecedented gathering of blue whales in what they were calling the new sanctuary. Satellite imagery confirms it, Sarah reported during their final team meeting aboard the Northern Star. 17 blue whales now using these waters as a permanent habitat. It's unprecedented in modern history. Jake studied the data displays, showing whale movements throughout the region. Grace and her calf remained at the center, their presence drawing others of their kind to waters that had become legendary among marine researchers. Yuan Chang's syndicate's gone dark, Marcus added. Checking his intelligence sources, their entire maritime operations shut down. Apparently, losing billions in classified military hardware made their Chinese partners unhappy. Not to mention the international embarrassment, Kate observed. Hard to explain how your anti-piracy operation ended up deploying experimental weapons in U.S. waters. The full story would never be known. Investigations had found only what Jake's team wanted them to find: evidence of military overreach, natural disasters, and what one scientist called unprecedented cooperative behavior among marine mammals. 4 different research vessels requesting access to the area, Mike reported. Everyone wants to study why these waters suddenly became a whale sanctuary. Let them look, Jake replied. The best cover story is the one nature writes herself. His team had gathered one last time before dispersing. Their mission was complete, but it had changed them all. They'd fought many battles in their military careers, but none had mattered quite like this. Local fishing communities different too, Alex noted. They're proud of these waters now, protective. Anyone suspicious shows up, they've got 50 pairs of eyes watching them. Tom Henderson's voice crackled over the radio, as if confirming her words. Heads up, Jake. Got some unusual vessels approaching from the northwest. Looked like research boats, but their gear's not quite right. The team tensed, ready to respond to new threats, but Jake smiled, recognizing the significance. The local fishermen had learned to spot what didn't belong, had become guardians in their own right. Multiple whale calls, Kate reported suddenly, checking her acoustic instruments. They're not running, they're responding. Through the ship's specialized sensors, they watched an incredible scene unfold. The suspicious vessels found themselves surrounded by surfacing whales. Not aggressive, not threatening, just present, watching, their massive forms a reminder that these waters had protectors. Well, look at that, Marcus chuckled. Guess we're not the only ones who learned some new tactics. The unknown vessels soon retreated, unwilling to operate under such intense scrutiny from both human and marine observers. These waters had developed their own immune system, their own way of rejecting threats. Time to go, Jake said finally. His team nodded, understanding. Their presence had to fade into legend, become part of the mystery that protected this sanctuary. What about you? Sarah asked. These are your waters. Still are, he replied, just protecting them differently now. One by one, his team departed. Marcus to his fishing route that somehow always crossed paths with suspicious vessels. Kate to her marine research that kept the sanctuary's waters mapped and monitored. Mike to his radio shop that maintained perfect communication coverage throughout the region. But they left something behind, a network of local fishermen trained to watch their waters. Scientific equipment donated to marine research stations. A community that had learned to protect its own. Grace surfaced near the Northern Star, her calf now almost as large as she was. Other whales rose around them, their calls carrying across waters that had become more than just a sanctuary. They'd become a symbol of something humanity badly needed to remember. That nature, when protected, could heal itself. Strange about Those currents, the lead FBI investigator had said during their final interview, way they moved during the storm, almost like they were designed to target specific vessels. Nature's mysterious that way, Jake had replied. Sometimes she shows us that her powers are beyond our understanding. Now, watching Grace lead her pod through waters that would forever remain free from hunters, Jake reflected on different kinds of victory. His team had won not by defeating an enemy, but by protecting something worth saving, not by destroying, but by creating a sanctuary that would outlast them all. "Beautiful evening," Sarah observed, preparing to leave for her own monitoring station. "Waters are particularly calm." "They usually are," Jake replied, "when they're at peace." The sunset painted the sanctuary in shades of gold, while beneath the surface ancient songs echoed through depths that had become legend. Some victories didn't need to be claimed. Some battles were best remembered only in the songs of whales and the stories of fishermen, and some waters would always have their guardians, watching from the shadows of waves and memory. 1 year after the Alaskan maritime incident, Jake stood on the deck of the Northern Star, watching the morning mist lift from waters that had changed the world. International marine protection laws had been strengthened, inspired by the mysterious sanctuary where whales gathered and hunters feared to tread. "Latest count just came in," Sarah called over the radio. 23 blue whales now. They're calling it the largest sustained population in the Northern Pacific. The sanctuary's reputation had grown beyond anything they'd planned. Research papers discussed the unique conditions that drew whales to these waters. Environmental groups celebrated the unexpected revival of marine life. Military vessels, regardless of nationality, gave the area a wide berth. Grace surfaced nearby, her calf now fully grown. They weren't alone. Other whales rose around them, their massive forms casting shadows through waters that had become a symbol of nature's resilience. Their calls echoed through Jake's instruments, no longer songs of distress, but of peace. "Got some interesting chatter," Mike's voice came through his secure channel. "Seems the Yuanchang syndicate's being investigated by their own government. Something about unauthorized military operations and international embarrassment." Jake smiled, checking his radar out of habit. The sophisticated military equipment still hidden beneath the Northern Star's innocent exterior hadn't been needed in months. The sanctuary protected itself now through means both natural and mysterious. Tom Henderson's boat approached, leading a group of international marine biology students. The local fishing community had embraced their role as guardians, turning their knowledge of these waters into a force for education and conservation. "Teaching them about the currents," Tom explained with a knowing look. "How they seem to know when something doesn't belong." The official investigation had never found explanations that satisfied everyone. Stories circulated about electromagnetic anomalies, impossible underwater currents, and whales that acted more like guardians than prey. The truth remained hidden in deep waters and deeper silence. Jake's team had dispersed but remained connected. To these waters, Marcus still patrolled the outer edges, his fishing routes matching suspicious vessel movements. Kate's research contributed to understanding the sanctuary's unique properties. Mike's communications network kept everything coordinated. But their greatest victory was in what they'd created, a place where nature had reclaimed its power, where the smallest fishing boat could make the largest military vessel retreat just by being watched by whales and witnesses. Grace breached suddenly, her massive form throwing spray against the morning sun. Other whales joined her, turning the sanctuary's waters into a display of natural majesty that needed no human protection. "Beautiful morning," Sarah observed, her boat drawing alongside. "Perfect day for fishing. Perfect day for watching," Jake corrected softly. These waters had taught him something about different kinds of strength. Sometimes the greatest power wasn't in weapons or tactics, but in creating something that protected itself. in turning hunters into witnesses and battles into legends that kept future threats away. The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating waters that had become more than just a sanctuary. They'd become a reminder that some forces were beyond human control, some places beyond human greed, and some guardians never needed to be seen to protect what mattered most.